What's up, my friends? Today we're here to talk about knots and just how useful a length of rope can be. This exact length of rope I used to set up the A-frame on my shelter up in the mountains, as well as lower limbs from when I did my big tree trimming project in my front yard. So this one piece of rope has paid itself off 10 times over. But to make it useful, you gotta be able to attach it to stuff, which is where knots come in. And it's been a while since I had a chance to brush up on my knots. I learned a handful of knots in Boy Scouts growing up, but it's been a long time since then. So to help me brush up on my skills, I got Rick here to help out.
All right.
Now, Rick's had a chance to brush up on his knot tying skills more recently because his oldest son's entered Boy Scouts. So he's had a chance to be a leader and teach the kids some of these things.
Yeah, and I was already really familiar with knots from my college days. I did a lot of rock climbing, and in those cases, like, your life is literally on the line.
Yeah.
And using the wrong knot and using the wrong rope, either one, can have catastrophic consequences. So I know how important it is to use the right knots in the right situations.
But then as a scout leader, you also had the chance to learn how to teach knots.
Yeah, and teaching oftentimes can be harder than just doing or even learning. In fact, a lot of times you learn best when you have to teach someone else, because you have to really internalize the skill. So,
True.
The muscle memory from rock climbing plus the teaching, I feel pretty solid on a lot of knots.
All right, well, let's put your knot knowledge to the test.
All right.
Now let's start with the most basic. What do you think is the most basic knot someone should have in their arsenal?
Yeah, we'll start today with an overhand knot.
Okay, it's about as basic as it gets, right?
Super simple. All right, for this, we're just gonna make a loop, and then we're gonna bring the end up through the loop, and we have a knot. It's as basic as it gets.
Super simple.
It's important to learn because it's a foundation for a lot of other knots, but also it works as a stopper knot. It can prevent other knots and things from sliding. So it has its own utility by itself. Okay. And we can take the exact same principle, but if we double it up on itself and then tie an overhand knot, but with two, and what we pull through is the loop, now we have a nice loop.
Ah, that's more useful.
Yep, that's the overhand loop.
Fitting name. Now, I've used this knot myself, in fact, when I did my tree trimming project, and the issue that I had with it was after dropping heavy branches on it, it really cinched this knot down super tight, so much so that I'm never going to be able to get this knot back out of this rope. So,
to me, that feels like a challenge. I kind of want to try, but we'll save that for another time.
But is there a loop knot that wouldn't cinch down that would make it so that you can untie it, making it so you're able to still use this rope for something else later?
Yeah, honestly, like the king of all knots, especially loop knots, is the one we'll learn next, and that's the bowline.
Bowline, I've heard that one. In fact, I remember learning that as a Cub Scout or a Boy Scout.
Yeah, tie it around your waist, right?
Yeah, you pull it around the back, over the top.
One-handed.
Yeah, they told us that's for if you're falling off a cliff. Someone tosses you a rope. I don't see it being super practical for that, but maybe if you were falling out of a raft, being swept through some white water, you'd be able to, if someone threw you a rope, you'd be able to tie that around yourself and
the reason that we use this for that is that it won't tighten down on me. Look, it's around my waist, it's not going to get tighter. So it's not going to pinch me and, if all my weight's on it or I've got the current pulling me or something.
Absolutely.
It's not going to tighten down and cause further damage to me. It's just a nice, I could put it up here like this and just kind of let it pull me. So nice. It's effective for that. The problem is the way they taught it to us in Scouts was the way I just showed it, which is only really effective if you want to tie it around you or have a giant loop. But I've actually found that I use this knot all the time as a loop knot, but with a smaller loop, kind of like this.
Okay.
Because it doesn't cinch down, it's super effective, especially for if I want to tie a loop around, if I've got a little fabric loop that I'm using for a rain fly. If I don't want it to cinch down on that because it'll wear out that fabric if my knot cinches down on it tight, right? I want to keep that loop there. And so it's perfect for that, but we need to learn how to tie it not around our waist in order to be able to do that.
Well, let me see how you do that then.
So I'm going to tie the loop here. So actually before the loop, I need to make a little bit, I need to make a loop. I need to make a little loop here. And I'm going to fold it over this way so that what's coming down toward the end is over the top. And then you can just remember the little nursery rhyme that the rabbit comes up out of the hole and he runs around the back of the tree and he goes back down into his hole. I never remember that nursery rhyme. I remember the rhyme because I know how to tie the knot. But that's the bowline. That's it. It's that simple, and then it doesn't cinch down. But the cool thing is, I can pull this super tight like you were explaining, but because of the way this knot is, it's pretty easy to just break like that. You can break it, so it's easier to untie than that overhand loop.
Beautiful. So you're not stuck with a loop at the end of your rope for the rest of your life.
That's one of the ideas. So it really is the king, especially of loop knots.
Nice. So now we got 2 loop knots, as well as that simple overhand knot.
Yeah.
So what should we do if we're wanting to connect 2 ropes to, say, double our length?
Okay, so there are some options for this, especially if you're tying ropes of different sizes together. But for simplicity's sake, we're going to go ahead and do the square knot.
Okay.
So for that, I'll grab a second rope here. It'll make it easier to see the 2 different colors. All right. For this, it's really important to remember well, I don't even know, does it really rhyme? Right over left, left over right, and through. You need to remember the saying.
The old adage.
You go right over left, and then under, and then you go left over right. So I'm using the same working end. Remember, I'm working off that red rope the whole time. So then left goes over the right in the same way. And then I end up with a nice square knot. And when I pull on it, you'll see that it stays square. Now, it works the same way if you go left over right and then right over left. It just matters that you use the same one both times. What happens, the problem is if you go right over left, and then, because I'm right-handed, so I use my right hand a lot, and I go right over left again, then I don't end up, look, when I pull on it, it doesn't stay square anymore. It then has a tendency to
pull apart.
Slip
out. That's a bad knot.
Yeah, we typically don't want our knots to slip unless we're tying a slip knot.
What would a slip knot be good for?
Well, there are a few use cases. There's one in particular that's really great where we actually tie 2 slip knots.
Okay.
And have you ever used like ratchet straps or something like that to
All
cinch
the time.
down? Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Well, we can do that just with a rope, only better. Imagine this scenario where you've got in a trailer or in the bed of your truck, right? You got a bunch of leaves and stuff. And so we got to throw a tarp over the top so they don't all blow away. Well, normally you would need a whole bunch of those ratchet straps because you don't just need one in the front and one in the back. You need them kind of across
Yeah, to hold
spots.
the whole thing down. You don't want to catch in any wind.
Right. So one way that you could do that, now they don't make those ratchet straps long enough to be able to just run one back and forth a bunch of times.
And with the metal hooks on the end, sometimes it's hard to actually run through an inlet
Yeah, exactly.
or an eyelet.
Yeah. So instead what we do is we tie a rope to one eyelet like in the corner, and then we could run it back and forth through the little rings or eyelets, or if it's like on a trailer, just, back and forth, anywhere that you would attach to. And the one rope goes back and forth, and when you get to the back, you tie one trucker's hitch, and you're done.
All right.
The whole thing was going to cinch down super tight with just one, and you don't need any ratchet straps, so you just saved yourself like $50.
Well, let me see how this is done.
All right, here's how we're going to do it. We're going to pull this in here.
Okay.
This is going to help us.
Something to tie to.
Yep. All right, so this end I've got tied off, and then this is, let's say, the last eyelet or the last rod that I'm going to tie to at the end. So then what I'm going to do is right before I get to the end, I'm going to make a little loop. And then I'm going to reach up through the loop and grab my loose end, my working end. Okay? And make this, pull that through so I get a little loop. That is my first slip knot. It's a slip knot because if I pull this way, it just comes undone. Right? So I loop it, reach through the loop. This is actually how you start a crochet. Don't ask me how I know that. A mom and 4 sisters, okay? All right. You know. All right. Then I'm going to take the other end, and it's wrapped around that, again, that last eyelet or something, or a pole or a rod or something. But I'm going to run this end through my loop. And that's going to give me this mechanical like leverage here so that I can really cinch it down.
Nice.
Okay? So when I do that, I've cinched it down really well. It's good and tight. Then I can just pinch here. There's a lot of friction there, so if I just pinch it, it'll hold pretty well. And then I take what's left, and I'm going to just bend it in half. Like I'm doubling it up. Wrap it around the back, and pull that little loop through. This is just so it's kind of like a little overhand knot on the end, but with a loop being pulled through instead of pulling the whole thing through. What that does is it makes it also a type of slip knot. So when I can pull it and it's undone. So it all comes apart when I'm done. But we'll show it one more time for your benefit. Go around the back and down and through it. And I just make that loop big enough that it won't want to come out. And then this is going to stay tight. It's not going to slide anywhere. So I was able to cinch it down really well because of that loop. And then now it's going to hold it there because of the second little slip knot that I made.
Beautiful. And what's that second knot called?
That one's called a halter hitch. And it's just going to hold it there, but come undone. So when we're all done here, pull that out, pull this apart, and we get our rope back instead of just having a looped, knotted mess.
That's awesome. Looks like you'd be able to get that line pretty tight as you're pulling up before you tie that second slip knot.
Right. But there is another one we could tie that will allow us to tighten it up after we've tied the knot.
Oh, really? What's that one called?
It's called a taut line, like tight line.
Oh, that's pretty fitting.
Yeah, knot names often tend to be that way. So let's go ahead and show how to do that. We'll bring this back in again. So for this one, I tie off the other end of the rope with any loop knot or whatever. I've got it tied off to something else. Oftentimes that'll be a bowline. And then I'm going to tie the other end to the other end of wherever I want the rope attached. And then what I'm going to do is, you see how I've kind of made a loop here? I'm going to take my working end through that loop. And then I'm just going to wrap it around through the same loop a second time. So I've got 2 wraps there. Then I'm actually going to go outside of it and make a second loop out here and pull the working end through that loop. So I've actually done 3 wraparounds with that working end. 2 through the first loop, 1 through a second loop.
Looks pretty.
And that's my knot. Yeah, it's a nice little pretty, but see how it's sliding here? Well, check this out. I can then pull that, and then get it really good and tight, and it wants to stay there.
Oh, beautiful. The friction of the rope just keeps it nice and tight.
Exactly.
Nice. I can see a lot of applications for that.
Yeah, I use it a ton when I'm camping. So if you think about it like with the rain fly, I'll tie a bowline around the little loop for my tent flies, and because I don't want that one to slide. And then I'll run the other end to my tent stake and tie that taut line on there, and then I can slide it and pull it really good and tight, and my rain fly's good and taut. I can use it for clothesline as well, tie it to a tree, and then to the other tree and tie a taut line on one of them.
Nice.
Works for all sorts of stuff.
Maybe a tripwire?
Yeah, absolutely. You can get a tripwire good and tight with this.
Nice. That's what I really needed. I needed a good knot for my tripwire so I can catch myself a Bigfoot.
Ooh. Good. Good. We need definitive proof.
Yeah, right? We need to know that he exists. Especially here in Idaho. He lives right here. He's our neighbor.
Exactly.
Well, thank you, Rick, for helping me brush up
Absolutely.
on my knots. And until next time, this has been Jake and Rick with Pantry Prep.